Dan Dennett is a year younger than me, almost to the day. Can you hear me at the back? But I must admit that I've grown to think of him as a sort of intellectual elder brother. Since the deaths of Bill Hamilton and John Maynard Smith, I've been rather short of intellectual heroes to consult on difficult questions. Thank goodness we still have Dan Dennett. A year or so ago, it seemed that it might be a close-run thing. I remember the shock, followed by deep gloom, that was cast over a large group of people in a New York theatre when we were informed that Dan had collapsed and was undergoing emergency surgery, which seemed, so we were informed, unlikely to succeed. Heroic surgery to save an intellectual hero, not just a national treasure, but a world treasure, at least to the world of the mind. Many of you, I'm sure, will have read the stirring testimonial that he read while he was in recovery. It was actually called Thank Goodness. It was widely published all over the internet and was read out to those gathered in San Diego for the Beyond Belief conference. Dan mentioned his religious friends who'd prayed for his recovery. He was touched by their efforts, but he chose to interpret their words as meaning that they had been thinking of him. And he added, "I'm not joking when I say that I have had to forgive my friends who said they were praying for me. I've resisted the temptation to respond, 'Thanks, I appreciate it, but did you also sacrifice a goat?' I feel about this the same way I would if one of them had said, 'I just paid a voodoo doctor to cast a spell for your health.' What a gullible waste of money that could have been spent on more important projects. Don't expect me to be grateful or even indifferent. I do appreciate the affection and generosity of spirit that motivated you, but wish you had found a more reasonable way of expressing it." Dan considered the impulse he might have felt to say, "Thank God," for his recovery. He asked himself whether his near-death experience had been some kind of epiphany. I find his response to this so stirring that I again want to read it out for you. "Yes, I did have an epiphany. I saw with greater clarity than ever before in my life that when I say thank goodness, this is not merely a euphemism for thank God. We atheists don't believe there's any God to thank. I really do mean thank goodness. There is a lot of goodness in this world, and more goodness every day, and this fantastic human-made fabric of excellence is genuinely responsible for the fact that I am alive today. It is a worthy recipient of the gratitude I feel today, and I want to celebrate that fact here and now." To whom, then, do I owe a debt of gratitude? To the cardiologist who's kept me alive and ticking for years and who swiftly and confidently rejected the original diagnosis of nothing worse than pneumonia. To the surgeons, neurologists, anesthesiologists, and the perfusionist who kept my systems going for many hours under daunting circumstances. To the dozen or so physician assistants, and to nurses and physical therapists, and X-ray technicians, and a small army of phlebotomists, so deaf that you hardly know they're drawing your blood. And the people who brought the meals, kept my room clean, did the mountains of laundry generated by such a messy case, wheelchaired me to X-ray and so forth. These people came from Uganda, Kenya, Liberia, Haiti, the Philippines, Croatia, Russia, China, Korea, India, and the United States, of course. And I have never seen more impressive mutual respect as they helped each other out and checked each other's work. But for all their teamwork, this local gang could not have done their jobs without the huge background of contributions from others. I remember with gratitude my late friend and Tufts colleague, the physicist Alan Cormack, who shared the Nobel Prize for his invention of the CT scanner. Alan, you have posthumously saved yet another life, but who's counting? The world is better for the work you did, thank goodness. Then there's the whole system of medicine, both science and the technology, without which the best intentions efforts of individuals would be roughly useless. So I am grateful to the editorial boards and referees, past and present, of Science, Nature, Journal of the American Medical Association, Lancet, and all the other institutions of science and medicine that keep churning out improvements, detecting and correcting them. I think you can see why Dan Dennett is my intellectual hero. He is one of today's most distinguished philosophers, but among philosophers, I would describe him as a scientist philosopher. Many philosophers call themselves philosophers of science, but rather few of them take the trouble to learn much science, to immerse themselves in the scientific literature, to talk to working scientists and understand what makes them tick. One of the things that strikes me about reading Dan's books is how much science I learn from them. New science, new experimental results, fascinating scientific research, often still unpublished, but which Dan knows about because he keeps his ear to the scientific ground and travels to visit laboratories where he's always an honoured guest. He is indeed a scientist as much as he is a philosopher, and he's also a superb explainer. Where other philosophers are mainly interested in showing off how clever they are to their colleagues, Dan really, really wants to be understood. He seems to make no distinction between a book written for lay people and a book written for professional philosophers. And this is something I also aspire to when writing for professional scientists. Clarity is clarity, and it doesn't matter who you're writing for. There should be no need to write separate, popular books which dumb down the books that are written for professionals. Dan thinks long and hard, not only about the philosophy itself, but about the best way to explain it. He's a great coiner of phrases, an inventive deviser of metaphors, a vivid painter of mental images. Intuition pump is one of his phrases, and it well describes exactly what he does when he's explaining something difficult to his readers. His celebrated lecture, Where Am I?, is a tour de force of the explainer's art, combining comedy and high drama with the usual weapons of the lecturer. Notions like skyhook and crane, the Cartesian theatre, the library of Mendel, universal acid, all these are superb intuition pumps, crafted to assist the reader to accompany him on an exciting mental adventure. He's a leading thinker in a wide range of important philosophical topics: philosophy of mind, the problem of free will, consciousness, evolution, and of course religion. Breaking the Spell is a pivotal contribution to the rather exhilarating revival which secularism is enjoying at the moment. In all these fields, as I said, I look up to him as an intellectual hero. Elder brother he may be, but also dynamic enfant terrible of the mind. And there's no paradox in the contrast. It's a huge pleasure and honour to me to present this award to Dan. And the fact that the award is in my name redoubles the pleasure and quadruples the honour. Dan. Can I just put this on you?
It's beautiful. Before you leave the stage, Richard, I would like to present you with the Dan Dennett Award. It is not quite as glorious as that. What this is a Jesus action figure that I found in a gift shop in Vermont. It has been autographed by Julia Sweeney, by you and by me and by Sam Harris, and we're going to get a few more signatures, I hope, from Ayan Hirsi Ali and from Hitch. And I think that probably, although I'm going to give this to you, the suitable place for this award is in next year's auction. Don't you think that would be an appropriate place? But for now, you are the keeper of the Jesus action figure. Well, I actually have a whole talk to give, but it's got some pictures, it's got some PowerPoint. I hope I can keep you awake. And let's see if the PowerPoint is going to work. I've got my first slide up. No, that's not it.
How do you like the award?
I love it. Sam gave us a talk which he quarreled with the very idea of atheism being a term. Well, I'm going to try to outdo him in sort of chutzpah for an atheist group. If somebody can find the where my PowerPoint is. Okay, there we go. Can everybody see? Good reasons for believing in God. As many of you know, I'm happy to say I've signed a lot of copies. This is the hardback of my book, Breaking the Spell. Many of you have not seen the British paperback cover, which I have to show you here because of the next slide that I want to show you, which I think is good news for atheists everywhere. This was sent to me by a friend. It's from the British scandal gossip magazine. Now, they pester their men for attention. What is it with Dawson's Creek's Joshua Jackson? He's on a beach with his stunning girlfriend, German actress Diane Kruger, and he wants to read a tome on rational atheism. So, you may not have realized it, guys, but atheism is a chick magnet. Now, long ago, most people really did believe in God. And some people still do. And I'm talking here about the basic, primitive phenomenon of belief, like, for instance, the belief that Mount Everest exists. Just straight, ordinary, everyday, uncomplicated belief in a proposition. Now, you can believe that Mount Everest exists and not know a whole lot about Mount Everest. For us, Mount Everest exists. It's just one of these four peaks. Which one is it? I doubt if any of you can pick out the picture of Mount Everest from these four mountains, but that does not disqualify you from believing the proposition that Mount Everest exists. It's one of them, and you could still tell me a bit about Mount Everest, enough to convince me that you are, as it were, competent to believe that Mount Everest exists. That's ordinary, everyday, straight-up belief. You don't have to be able to pick Mount Everest out of a lineup necessarily, and you know enough about it so that you know what you're talking about when you say that Mount Everest exists. Now, let's try another case. I can't even read this. Proposition alpha. Probably Herr and San Dogar Yatsar Ver, something like that. Now, I haven't the faintest idea what this means, because it's in Turkish. But I believe it's true. And the reason I believe it's true is that I went to a trusted Turkish colleague and said, Güven, please give me a sentence of Turkish. Do not tell me what it means, but just, it's got to be true. And so he gave me this sentence. And I'm happy to say that I've told people, if you know what it means, don't tell me. I want to keep using this example, and I want to be able to say truly, cross my heart, I haven't the faintest idea what this proposition means, but I would bet a large sum of money that it's true. Okay? Notice, I've got nothing up my sleeve. This isn't magic. This isn't supernatural. It's a very simple state of affairs. I've got somebody to give me a proposition that they warrant as true, and I think, I trust you, I'm going to believe you. Okay. Nothing special about that. Well, here's another proposition, proposition beta. E equals mc squared. How many of you believe that? Right. How many of you understand it? Aha! I use this example, by the way. I gave a talk about my book at Fermi Lab outside Chicago to an audience of about 250 of the world's great physicists. And as I put this up, I said, I don't think this example is going to work in this crowd. I said, how many of you believe it? And all the hands went up. How many of you understand it? Of course, all the hands went up. But then, as they were sort of laughing about that, one of them stood up and said, yeah, the experimentalists think they understand it, but they don't really. Now, do I believe alpha and beta? Well, I don't understand alpha at all. I semi-understand beta. I can make some basic algebraic manipulations. I couldn't derive it, really. I couldn't use it in any way. So I don't really qualify. But that's all right. Because I can do what we all do all the time, and that is we can pass the buck to the experts. I don't have to understand it, but there have to be people that really understand it. And this is, oddly enough, curiously enough, this is one of the great powers of language. One of the unsung powers of language is that you can use language to give yourself formulae that you can use without understanding them. We do the believing, we leave the understanding to the experts. And this is, in fact, a very useful tactic. There are scientists who use formulae in their work that they themselves really don't know how to derive, really don't know how to use, but there's a sort of a chain of authority that they can trust so that they can use them with confidence. Compare that situation with science with religion. With religious formulae, even the experts claim not to understand. In fact, they don't confess that they don't understand. They insist that they don't understand. They make a special marvelous glory of the fact that the central propositions of their faith are incomprehensible even to the experts. Now, this is just bizarre. I mean, when you think about it from, sort of take a Martian perspective on this, this is just strange as the devil. How on earth did this strange state of affairs arise? That's what I want to talk about. First of all, I think I will get no disagreement from this crowd when I say there simply are no good reasons for believing that God exists. Christopher was very, very eloquent on this score this afternoon. Come on. There just aren't any good reasons. The arguments are all from hunger. And there's plenty of good reasons for believing that God does not exist. But there are several good reasons for declaring a belief in God. Now, really, there aren't any good reasons for believing in God. There are many good reasons for not believing in God. And I'm sure you share with me sometimes, you contemplate people talking about their belief in God, and you just want to exclaim, how can anybody believe this stuff? And the answer is, they can't. They don't. Actually, they don't. Now, there are unreflective folks, and there are plenty of them, who believe, a la my proposition alpha, the one in Turkish, that whatever it is that those priests say, that our priests say, it's true. But remember, that's not really believing the proposition. That's just believing that that formula, whatever it means, it's Turkish to me, it's true. And it doesn't bother them. They just accept this on the authority of their religious leaders, the leaders of their community, their elders. This is not an unusual state of affairs. And most people are too busy living their lives to be very reflective. So those people believe that the things that they are asked to say in church or in the mosque are true, And they don't really care too much about the fact that they really haven't got much of a clear idea, even a clue what they mean. That's not their issue. They just don't think about it. That's how come they aren't gobsmacked and bewildered and embarrassed by the religious propositions. They don't believe them. They just believe that whatever those formulae say and whatever they mean, if they mean anything, it's true. But what about the reflective folk? They have a problem. They can see as clearly as we can that there are no good reasons for believing in God. They can. They can see just the way we do. That is why, by the way, I don't waste much breath on arguments against the existence of God or refuting arguments for the existence of God, because, quite frankly, I've met very few people that give them any stock anyway. These people, the reflective people, they know there aren't any good arguments, any good reasons to believe in God. But they think that belief in God is, for some reason, obligatory. That's what I want to look at. What their reasons are for thinking that belief in God is obligatory. What they do, given their belief, is they contrive to believe in God. And that's a phenomenon which is quite distinct from believing in God. Here's a good line from Cardinal Ratzinger, who's been mentioned several times before. He's now Pope Benedict XVI. He talks about what the Catholic faithful are required to profess. Required to profess. So the Catholics then have this category into which all good Catholics fall of being professors. Well, needless to say, I don't want to use that word. I want to reserve professors for an altogether a more reasonable occupation, the one that I myself hold. So I'm going to call them declarers. So what are religious folk required to declare? Well, they profess belief in God. Why on earth do they do it? Why on earth do they do it? Remember, reasons for declaring belief in God are not identical to reasons for believing in God. These are two different states, and they have different reasons. And now I'm going to talk about reasons for declaring belief in God. The reflective folk who go on declaring their belief in God, and we know there's many. We're not talking about bumpkins. We're talking about educated people, college-educated people, who go on declaring their belief in God. They're not stupid. Well, some of them are, but then some atheists are stupid too. So. They're not radically misinformed. They are worried about something that we atheists should actually take very seriously. I'm going to now give you several good strategic reasons. Now, they're strategic because they're not reasons for believing in God. They're reasons for trying to believe in God or declaring your belief in God, for believing in God, and they're strategic. And the first, most obviously, is fear. And I don't need to tell you about that. We heard eloquently from Ayaan Hirsi Ali about fear. We've heard about the fear of many people, their fear of God, their fear of a vengeful God, of a God who demands this belief. But actually, a much more interesting category of fear is the fear of the reflective folks who think they are obliged to support the belief in God. And what they're mainly afraid of, I think, is catastrophic collapse of consensus. Now, Hitch earlier was talking about a failed state. A failed state, as we know only too well these days, is a truly depressing and ugly, awful situation. When you have a failed state, it's very hard for any force on earth to pull a failed state back into sanity. Nobody trusts anybody. The smart people leave the country. There's nothing but corruption and warlords and violence. It's just a horrible, catastrophic abandonment of civility, reliability, trustworthiness, and everything else. A failed state is a very grim and terrible state of affairs. And confronted with the prospect of a failed state, I want you to put yourself in the position of somebody of some authority in a state which is on the brink of becoming a failed state. And the people are asking you, is it safe to go to market? Is it safe to plant my crops? Is it okay? Can I go shopping? And you don't know that it is. You rather doubt that it is. There are very good reasons under these circumstances to lie. Very good reasons. I think each one of us here would be strongly tempted to lie under these situations, and for a very good reason. Saying, no, it's too late. This has had to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If there is a small chance that you can salvage things, just goose the society a little bit into a sense of confidence, you may be able to save it. So what you say may have a huge ripple-on effect, and so there's a tremendous reason, a very good reason to lie. And this is, I think, the state of a great many people who are reflective people who go on declaring their belief in the existence of God. They're terribly afraid that if that belief somehow falters, we will have a societal collapse. Now, this sort of issue is not just about religion. Think about hyperinflation. We have a number of phenomena in the world in which social consensus is a sort of treading water that holds everything up. As soon as people start losing confidence in a currency, and the currency starts to hyperinflate, and then we get hyperinflation, and it all goes to hell. And if you can forestall that and calm people down and reestablish their confidence in things, you can do some real good in the world, but of course it may require telling some white lies. The gold standard, I was thinking about this the other day, there's a really nice case where people were terribly afraid that if we abandoned the gold standard, confidence in currency would just be so volatile that this was really dangerous. That's one of the best reasons, not a good one, but not a bad one either, for maintaining the gold standard. As a sort of fetish, really, to protect the confidence of the community in a currency. And I think something like this is going on in the belief by so many religious people that they have to cling tenaciously with white knuckles to their religious declarations. Runaway cynicism can even lead to the death of communication. We have Aesop's fable about the boy who cried wolf, and similar phenomena have been seen, auguried, imagined, and so we have this kind of fear, which is not unreasonable. It can be very well informed. If we think it's false, fine, but there's some problems with that too. By the way, another great example of this is in Doug Hofstadter's wonderful column about the luring lottery. Some of you may remember that in Scientific American, a sort of catastrophic loss of trust. Now, suppose we think that, well, okay, Dan, you've shown us that this is reasonable, but, you know, they're just wrong. Giving up the belief in God is like giving up the gold standard. Life goes on, community, confidence, trust, security, it's just not such a big problem. Okay, so we want to explain this to these people. Can we reason with them? No. Why? Because we should expect them to shun the opportunity to discuss our disagreement rationally, because the very discussion of the issue undermines the consensus. Don't talk about it. Shh. Don't even think about it. There's been some very elegant research by the psychologist Philip Tetlock on sacred values. What makes a value sacred is don't even think about it. You should feel guilty for even thinking about it, even if you decide the right thing about it. It's to protect us from subversive criticism which might lead to a catastrophic collapse of values. So there's fear in several different varieties. And what I've tried to do is to show you that in your own lives, in your own circumstances, you can imagine a case where you would be gripped by that fear and you would think the right thing to do here is to grit my teeth and lie. Maintain a pretense to save a situation from catastrophe. Another is love, and we've heard a lot about that today. It's so wonderful. The speakers today weren't just vivid and compelling. They illustrated my issues just right down the line. The prospect of disappointing or enraging or hurting or those we love is so terrible. I actually hope to all of us that it overpowers our candor. We just can't face telling the truth when grandma or mother or our sisters or somebody else that we love, we're afraid that's going to hurt. And so many people are trapped in a pretense from which any escape would be, in their eyes, a betrayal. Our overtures, our skeptical overtures, therefore, threaten to expose them. No wonder they loathe us. No wonder they loathe us. We are threatening them with a choice between betrayal and lying, which they do not like. There's a lovely new book. I wish it were here. It just came out. I'm not sure it's actually out. Yes, it is. Called Philosophers Without Gods. It's a collection of essays put together by the philosopher Louise Anthony. By the way, my little piece, thank goodness, which Richard quoted from, is in there. Brand new essays about, these are philosophers, some of whom actually had religious training and went to religious schools, and they're all atheists now, and they've written essays about their life. One of the best is by my dear late friend David Lewis, and it's called Divine Evil. And this issue came up. Hitch actually spoke about this. Lewis develops the following argument. I'm just going to give you the barest bones of it. The Christian God, he points out, is a God of judgment and punishment. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. In fact, eternal punishment for unrepentant sinners and disbelievers, if you read the Bible literally, as Hitch said. And at least in North Korea, you get to die. It's not eternal punishment. But in heaven or in hell, it's eternal. It's this infinite pain. That seems to be the implication of the Christian Bible. Well, that's nasty, as Richard has said. How could you ever respect anybody who not only believed in but worshipped a God that was the perpetrator of infinite pain? It's so unproportional to whatever your crime is. An eternity of suffering. This is just outrageous. Can we admire the believers? Lewis asks, and he says, only if they're ignorant of the nature of the perpetrator. I'm sorry for the long quote, but it's good, and I'll pass through it quickly. He says, David Lewis says, we dodge the consequence by keeping it all in soft focus, consoling ourselves with the thought that hellfire and brimstone are mere conceits, that grown-up theists have gotten beyond the cartoon scenarios. That is probably the stance most favored by those who worship the perpetrator. Starting from their trust in God, they suppose that there must be some nice version of the story, one that will not literally end with billions of damned souls writhing in eternal agony. Non-believers have been able to excuse their religious friends on the grounds that they're probably not clear-headed about the commitments of their worship. How could you condone that your friend worshipped such an evil perpetrator? He very usefully compares this God with Hitler. We can think of them as good people who have not seen the perpetrator's dark side. In bringing the problem of divine evil to their attention, David Lewis says slyly, I am presenting them with a choice they have previously avoided. And then he ends with a lovely punchline. I may be making it impossible for myself to admire many whom I have previously liked and respected. That is part of the dynamic of this issue, is that if we push hard, as we should, on our friends and those we admire and respect, we may awkwardly find ourselves in the position of no longer being able to admire and respect those that we have previously thought rather well of, now that we've removed their confusion and imposed this knowledge on them. So there's two, and here's a third reason, and that's guilt. The guilt of the deceivers is just part of this. That is the guilt of the priests and the leaders who know better. It's just stunning how much guilt there is among the priests and imams and pastors of this world when they know very well that the things that they are saying in their pulpits are not what they believe. But it propels the infectious guilt of the deceived. They pass the buck to the deceived and let the people in the congregation police themselves. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, in this stupendous book, is, to me, very eloquent on just exactly this topic. I'm calling it the mutual policing of the devout. She doesn't need to fear the imam or to listen to the imam. She can just get from her sisters, from her brother, from her aunts, from her family, from her clan. They're all involved in enforcing the pretense of the beliefs and making her feel terribly guilty and afraid for not maintaining them. It reminds me of this stunt which some of you may have done, where you get a circle of people and everybody sits down in the lap of the person behind them, and it's all self-supporting. You can all sit down, which is a sort of a nice trick. But in this instance, it's not so nice, because what you can have is a whole society that is supporting itself on nothing but the enforcement by its own members of the obligations that have come from somewhere and who knows where anymore. You can cancel out the priests, the imams, the whole group just goes right on perpetuating this terrible cycle of guilt. Boyd and Richardson, I'm a professor. I can't resist getting a little bit academic here. Boyd and Richardson have a lovely paper on second-order punishing. It's an evolutionary model which shows that when you have second-order punishing, that is, when you not only punish your people in your group for transgressions, but you punish those who refuse to punish, that this creates a potent situation where just about any taboo at all can be maintained simply by the cycle of punishment that's created. And of course, punishment doesn't have to be corporal punishment. It can be just disapproval. It can be just banishment. It can be just shame and so forth. And we got to break this cycle. How do we do it? Well, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, in her book, gives a wonderful example of what broke it for her. And I was so glad that she mentioned it today. I already had this slide in here, because I was going to mention it. It was a detail that just knocked me out when I read it in the book. Nancy Drew. Who would have thought that the Nancy Drew books would have been just dynamite to her? They gave her, as she said, tales of freedom, adventure, of equality between girls and boys, trust and friendship. I want you to remember that and think about all the different sorts of Nancy Drew germs that you can spread around in different places. And it won't work for everybody. We want to spread thousands of different ideas of this sort, recognizing that all it takes is one of these to get into the right mind, and we've broken the cycle for one person. Who would have guessed that Nancy Drew would break the cycle for this amazing woman? But, by her own testimony, it did. Well, there's another way of doing it. Consider the successful campaign of the gays. And you were just speaking about this just a minute ago. Here's Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. What a brilliant advance that program has made. Not everybody likes it. Some people hate it. But it has simply shifted the balance of what's considered normal, what's considered acceptable. It has simply changed the playing field, I think, inalterably, in a very good direction. We have gay roles in sitcoms. We have the gay Congressman Barney Frank. This is a wonderful progress in this attention, this consciousness raising that Richard talks about, and we want to have more of it. And I think that, inspired by the successful hijacking of the word gay, the word brights, as coined by Paul Geisert and Minga Futrell, is a worthy shot. And I know a lot of you hate the term, but a lot of homosexuals hated the term gay when it came out too. It may take a few years for this to catch on, and some of you may never want to use it, and that's true. Some gays never want to call themselves gay either. But they all are grateful to the change in consciousness that the word gay has provided, and maybe the word brights can do the same thing. I don't, in this audience, don't have to give the website you know about the Brights Network. And some, as I say, a lot of you don't like the word. Oh, it's so arrogant, it suggests that if you're not bright, you're dim. Well, actually, of course, it does. But we don't say that any more than the gays say that the heterosexuals are glum. There happens to be a nice, positive, upstanding word for the opposite of gay, and that's straight. Oh, gay, straight, two nice, positive words. So I've suggested that if the non-brights want to have a name for themselves, they should call themselves the supers. That's a nice word. Super, because they believe in the supernatural and we don't. So they can be the supers and we can be the brights. And they're both nice words. But I haven't seen many of them taking me up on this, but I think it's a good suggestion. More recently, just before coming here, I thought about this a bit and I decided, you know, actually, I think there may be another species of non-bright, not just supers. There may be murkies. Now, supers and murkies are two distinct species of non-brights. And they really are, now that I've been thinking about it, quite different. This is maybe just an aesthetic matter, a difference in taste. Murkies, they shun clarity, they like mystery. Philosophers call them Mysterians. They want things to be kept soft focus. They want to turn down the lights. Shh, don't break the spell. They are, in general, in favor of a sort of a gauze filter over everything so that nothing's very clear. They like things to be murky. Supers want there to be supernatural things. They want real magic. They want miracles. And these are really distinct ways of not being bright. For instance, Tom Nagel is a murky but not a super. Tom Nagel, the philosopher, one of my favorite philosophers, also one of my favorite opponents. Here's Tom. I quote him. This is the passage that the odious Leon Wieseltier claims I pulled out of context and misrepresented Tom Nagel's views. Here's what Tom says. It isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. He's an anti-theist. So he certainly is no super. That's in his book, The Last Word. But he is a murky. He's a very urbane, humane Mysterian, and it's immensely appealing to many people. So we don't have just the enemy of the supers to fight. That's not our only opponent. We also have to have, as a targeted opponent, the murkies of this world. And they will take offense if we call them supers. They're not supers. They have no truck with miracles or supernatural beings. They're just murkies. And they think that by being murky, by having everything murky, they're protecting something important. It's never quite clear what. If they could get clear about it, they wouldn't have to be murky. So we need lots of equally engaging examples of brights leading fulfilling moral lives. I mean, Tom Nagel's a wonderful guy. He's done brilliant work. He's done lovely work in political and judicial philosophy. He's a really fine example of what a philosopher can be. I admire him tremendously. And so, for me, it's a problem that he is such an honorable and exemplary fellow, and yet he's a murky. So we have to confront the murkiness, and we have to provide examples of equally marvelous brights to give people just role models for what a bright can be. Now we have Pete Stark. And I do hope that he's the first of many who will come out of the closet and admit that they're atheists. I'm often asked, when do you think there will be an atheist president? Ever? I said, oh, we've had lots of atheist presidents. They just wouldn't admit it. And certainly, as Richard was saying, we know there's got to be atheist congressmen, atheist senators, and maybe we can make the situation change enough so that they will come out, and they will come out. That's the point of Richard's proposal. So there we have 3 good strategic reasons for declaring belief in God. And here's another one, the Concord fallacy. This was mentioned. My whole talk here was beautifully presaged, so I can sort of speed over this. The Concord fallacy is when one makes a hopeless investment, one sometimes reasons, I can't stop now, otherwise what I've invested so far will be lost. Iraq. Well, Christopher Hitchens gave us 2 examples. He also gave us the example of Billy Graham. You know, hey, at this point in my life, what am I going to do? I've devoted my whole life to it. There's so many religious leaders out there who late in their life are trapped by the Concord fallacy. I think we should feel actually a fair amount of sympathy for them, even if we heartily disapprove of their inability to have the courage to come forward. But we should recognize that it takes tremendous courage for them to do this. If you want to read a very moving book on this, I recommend John Updike's novel, In the Beauty of the Lilies, about Clarence Wilmot, a Protestant minister who loses his faith, finds the courage after many years in the pulpit to announce his atheism, and then you watch his life plummet thereafter. The Concord fallacy is a very compelling, if ignoble, reason. And then finally, just plain embarrassment. I don't know how many of you follow chess or computer chess, but when Deep Thought was playing in one of its matches, it made a move on move 12, and on move 13 it took the move back. And the commentators roared with laughter. They said, this was hilarious, boy. It showed that a computer was incapable of embarrassment. No human player would do that. Even if they could see, oops, darn, that was a mistake. It just takes too much out of you to say, oops, sorry, made a mistake. We hate to make mistakes. And we hate even more to admit to making mistakes. And there are a lot of people out there who would hate to admit, oops, sorry, this religion thing I've been doing for the last 5 years of my life is just, sorry, a big mistake. It takes an unusual courage to acknowledge that, or just weirdness. So the outcome is what I've called belief and belief. Some people believe in God. How many? It's very hard to say, actually, because some people believe in belief in God. And there are more people who believe in belief in God than believe in God. Well, how do I know that? Well, all the people who actually believe in God also believe in belief in God. I mean, I don't know about you, but I have not really encountered anybody who goes around saying, oh man, I just wish I could get rid of this belief in God. It's so embarrassing, you know. No, if you believe in God, you're proud of it. But then there's all the other people. So they all believe in belief in God. And then there's all the people who believe in belief in God but don't believe in God. Well, what's the proportion? What's the ratio? We'll never know. Because those who believe in belief in God behave exactly the way people behave who believe in God, except that they won't, say, run into a hail of bullets expecting God to save them. There aren't many people who believe in God that way. So we can't tell. Maybe we're tiptoeing around and very few people actually believe in God. They just believe in belief in God. So what we've seen is the evolution of the God concept in the last few thousand years from Yahweh, a really sharp, craggy, real Mount Everest type God, to the ground of all being, a low, you can barely tell it's a mountain, you know? Now, is this evolution homing in on the best concept? That's what the religious theologians like to say. You know, this is a theory, and we are getting closer and closer. We're getting the better concept of God all the time. Is that what it is, or is it the erosion in the face of skepticism? And I think it's pretty clear that it's erosion in the face of unrelenting skepticism over actually several thousand years. The weathering of the God concept at an almost imperceptible rate. It's very important that the weathering go on without our sort of noticing it. It happens every time a preacher tweaks a phrase in his sermon to avoid irritating or arousing any skepticism in somebody out in the congregation. If the congregation has been frowning a little bit, he's going to start watering down the doctrine just a little bit. Won't even realize he's doing it. Gradually, over the years, the concept of God gets watered down, watered down, watered down, watered down. These personal revisions are passed on without notice, not just from preachers, but from individuals, parents talking to their children, till gradually what started out as really a Mount Everest type concept of God becomes a sort of amorphous, cloudy, mysterious concept that nobody really knows what it is even. Mystery is elevated and considered itself to be wonderful. And we get the privatization of the concepts. This is particularly true in the say, the mega churches in this country, where we don't care what your concept of God is, just so long as you're one with Jesus and you come to the church. And so they're actually allowing you to freelance it and come up with your own concept of God, whatever you like. It doesn't matter. They've begun to realize that it doesn't matter what concept of God you have, because nobody believes it anyway. So we get the almost comical confusion of today. If it were sped up, it's very important this happened very imperceptibly. This is like the heating up the pail of water with a frog in it. If it were sped up, it would just be hilarious. The revision piled on revision piled on revision, and all in one direction. Here's a quote. "It is the final proof of God's omnipotence that he need not exist in order to save us." Now, that's a joke. That's a wonderful joke by Peter de Vries in his hilarious novel, The Mackerel Plaza, back in 1958. God is so great that the greatness precludes existence. That is not a joke. That is said in all po-faced seriousness by a Buddhist scholar in a book published in 1989. As I say, you speed it up and it would just be hilarious. So the picture of God, which started out just as a sort of eroded mountain, now the fog has rolled in. And it's really just about impossible to tell to get your bearings or figure out what you're attacking or what you're criticizing. And so we have this Alice in Wonderland world of theism today. And my suggestion to you is don't be angry, be amused. Be proud. We've got them on the run. They've been on the run, actually. They've been on the run for 1,000 years. That's the erosion that we see in this God concept. We got rid of the Yahweh, Mount Everest, long ago, and now we're into the fog. We're almost there. We're almost there. And so what's left of them? Not very much. We get a lot of name calling. Richard was talking about this the other day. Here's this lovely quote. I love this. Can an atheist or agnostic commentator discuss any aspect of religion for more than 30 seconds without referring to religious people as imbeciles, extremists, mental deficients, fascists, enemies of the public good, crypto-Nazis, conjuremen, irrationalists, authoritarian despots, and so forth? Well, I think I've actually gone out of my way to say these people are intelligent. They're well informed. They're just trapped. That's from Jack Berlinerbaugh. Having said this, he goes on to call us the soccer hooligans of reasoned discourse. This is Sam and Hitch and Richard and me. Stanley Fish, don't need to say much about him. He quoted this with approval. Now, these tactics I think of as a testimonial to the power of rational skepticism, and we should respond to them firmly but gently. A little good-natured chiding or teasing can work wonders. I was asked by ABC News earlier today about the new apologetics, this new movement that's arising mainly within the Catholic Church, but not just, the new apologetics. And I think this is wonderful. These advocates are useful to us because they aren't straw men. They are creating articulate arguments for their various creeds, which they're now prepared, they say, to argue for. Wonderfully, they embarrass many of the faithful. What? We're supposed to believe. What? Because you can't articulate these views without articulating some fairly drastic claims, which a lot of the faithful just, they never imagined they were signing up for that. So I think that I do not regret the occurrence of this new wave of apologetics spokespeople. They're fish in a barrel. We get to expose their tricks. One of my favorite is witnessing. I'm going to pass this on to you because I think this is a little social bit you really should have in your kit. And I go to an authority, Cardinal Dulles, in an article of his called "The Rebirth of Apologetics." He's very candid. I don't think he realizes how candid he's being. He says, personal testimony calls for an epistemology quite distinct from the scientific, in which interpretations proffered by others are not accepted on authority but tested by critical probing. But when we proceed by testimony, he's talking about religious testimony, the situation is very different. Without in any way compelling us to believe, the witness calls for a free assent that involves personal respect and trust. To reject the message is to withhold confidence in the witness. In other words, witnessing is the ploy of personalizing in such a way that you have no choice either but to mumble and bite your lips and say, well, okay, or you're going to have to be rude and say, well, you're just deluded. And most of us don't want to do that. Here's how you should respond politely to somebody who does the personal witnessing thing. You say, look, you're playing the witnessing card. You leave me no choice but to be rude. I can't accept what you say, so I have to tell you that I don't accept it. And that does impugn your honesty. And it makes you, I simply say you're incredible. Not in the good sense. If that's rude, you leave me no choice. Do you realize, you might say, that you're using that old con artist trick? You know, con artists have known for many years that if the mark starts getting skeptical and critical, they play the hurt feelings card. What? You don't trust me? It's a con. Now, a lot of people use a con without knowing that they're using a con. You can gently point out to them, What you just did is a variation on an old con artist trick. Do you really want to do that? Then there's the business about metaphor. This is such a shell game. Does God judge or does he judge? Does he listen or does he listen? Is God merciful or merciful? Are we to take these terms literally or metaphorically? Does God punish or does he punish? Now, what I think we need to do is to point out to people who rely on this that their unembarrassed exploitation of this convenient dodge, as if they'd never noticed that they're availing themselves of a parlor trick. We should make them embarrassed when they do this. We should show them that this is just a cheap trick. I have a bad joke. Lucy thinks rock is to die for. Desi thinks rock is to die for. Lucy's thinking of Rock Hudson. Desi's thinking of rock music. They don't really agree on anything. Now, I submit that many people, the different concepts of God are more different than Rock Hudson and rock music. But people say, hey, we're not atheists. We all believe in God in our own ways. Yes, and Lucy and Desi both believe in rock. It's just a bad pun. Now, why do people do this? They do it because of belief in God. And belief in God has eclipsed belief in God as a reason. And we should recognize that and start adjusting our strategies to meet that. So I've given you 5 actually good strategic reasons for declaring your belief in God even though you don't believe in God, for believing in God. I don't have to tell you there are better reasons for not believing in God, and we know them, and they've been rehearsed for us here. Or are we perhaps wrong? Let's be open-minded and think. This fear that the opposition has of catastrophic collapse of society, for instance, what if they're right about that? Then we're being vandals. This is what's behind the "I'm an atheist, but" line that Richard and others have written about. These are the people who share our atheism, but are really afraid that we're doing a lot of harm when we press the case. Well, I'm going to concentrate on one example who has not, I think, been used in this regard, and that's David Sloan Wilson in his book Darwin's Cathedral, which is a very interesting book in many ways, but it has a bombshell at the end that I think nobody's really commented on. In this book, David Sloan Wilson is an evolutionary biologist. He's battled with Richard for years over the issue of group selection, and that's a long story for another day and another group of people. But I want to concentrate on just one aspect of David Sloan Wilson's work in this book, Darwin's Cathedral. David introduces a distinction between what he calls factual realism and practical realism. And this is what he says. It is true that many religious beliefs are false as literal descriptions of the world, but this merely forces us to recognize 2 forms of realism: a factual realism based on literal correspondence, and a practical realism based on behavioral adaptedness. He illustrates it. An atheist historian who understood the real life of Jesus but whose own life was a mess as a result of his beliefs would be factually attached to and practically detached from reality. So he ought to believe a myth even at the expense of his factual knowledge in order to keep his life not a mess. That seems to be the implication. Rationality, says Wilson, is not the gold standard against which all other forms of thought are to be judged. Adaptation is the gold standard against which rationality must be judged, along with all other forms of thought. If this were a philosophical audience and it weren't though late at night, I would take issue with that, but I just draw your attention to these passages. It is the person who elevates factual truth above practical truth who must be accused of mental weakness from an evolutionary perspective. If there is a trade-off between the 2 forms of realism, such that our beliefs can become more adaptive only by becoming factually less true, then factual realism will be the loser every time. So he seems to be giving what he thinks of as an evolutionary endorsement for practical realism over factual realism. And indeed, he goes on to say, many intellectual traditions and scientific theories of past decades have a similar silly and purpose-driven quality once their cloak of factual plausibility has been yanked away by the hand of time. If believing something for its desired consequences is a crime, then let those who are without guilt cast the first stone. Yeah. Well, I want to point out the fundamental difference between factual realism and practical realism is that the truth or falsity of the factual realist theories is always an issue. Imagine if a priest were to say, well, of course, there isn't really a God who listens to your prayers. That's just a useful fiction, an oversimplification. Now, even the Unitarians don't just blurt out the fact that these may be useful fictions, since it's quite apparent that their utility depends on their not being acknowledged to be fictions. In other words, practical realism, as advised and recommended by David Sloan Wilson, is paternalistic and disingenuous. It appears, he says, that factual knowledge is not always sufficient by itself to motivate adaptive behavior. At times, a symbolic belief system that departs from factual reality fares better. At what? At motivating behavior. Well, you know, I think he's right about that. Is this a recommendation that one should lie when it will lead to adaptive behavior? Does Wilson recognize the implications of his position? Let us consider practical realism of Cheney, Bush, and Rumsfeld. In a chilling article several years ago by Ron Suskind, White House correspondent, we get the following quote. The aide to President Bush said that guys like me were in what we call the reality-based community, which he defined as people who believe that solutions emerge from your judicious study of discernible reality. He goes on, I nodded and murmured something about Enlightenment principles and empiricism. He cut me off. That's not the way the world really works anymore, he continued. We're an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality. And while you're studying that reality, judiciously, as you will, we'll act again, creating other new realities which you can study too, and that's how things will sort out. We're history's actors, and you, all of you, will be left to just study what we do. There's practical realism for you. Now, it seems to me that David Sloan Wilson hasn't thought this through. He maybe, though, is saying that we're actually confronting with a sort of tragedy. It may be that our quest for scientific truth has somehow trapped us. It's too late for practical reality. That was for bygone days. We're stuck now with factual reality, which sometimes won't motivate us. We just know too much. We can never again act honestly follow the path of practical realism. I don't believe it, but that might be the position that he holds. Well, if so, we will just have to learn to do the best we can, guided by our knowledge. And we will have to set practical realism aside. It's too late for that. There's no going back. But I'm actually optimistic. Here we see the Vatican. 20 years ago, if I had stood up and said, in a few years the Soviet Union will evaporate, will not exist anymore, people would have laughed. If I said, apartheid will be gone in just a few years, people would have laughed. Sometimes institutions, phenomena that seem to be massive and have tremendous inertia, can just pop like a bubble. So how do we know until we try? Maybe within our children's lifetime, the Vatican will become the European Museum of Roman Catholicism. And maybe Mecca will become Disney's Magic Kingdom of Allah. If you think that's funny, just bear in mind that the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul Started off as a church, then it was a mosque, and today it's a museum. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great story.